In April 2026, the Strait of Hormuz essentially stopped functioning. The global energy market seized up almost overnight. Supply chains for both oil and liquefied natural gas froze, sending rapid inflationary shocks through the global economy. Looking at this map of Japan's energy imports, you can see the scale of the threat. The country relies on the Middle East for over 90% of its crude oil. The Japanese government immediately treated this as a severe energy security shock. They scrambled to open diplomatic channels to reopen the strait, while standard utility providers braced for crippling shortages. A single, remote geographic choke point had effectively put the entire Japanese economy on hold. By all conventional logic, a massive domestic power generator like J-POWER should be facing the exact same headwind. Yet their internal assessments tell a different story. For J-POWER, this crisis is actually pushing their business forward in key areas. How does an energy shock that suffocates an entire nation create a strategic advantage for one specific utility company? J-POWER's stability depends on the specific hidden mechanics of their internal generation portfolio. This diagram breaks down J-POWER's 18.1 gigawatts of generation. 51% is renewables, 49.1% is thermal. Because they rely on water, wind, and coal, wild fluctuations in Middle Eastern oil and LNG barely register on their baseline. Contrast that with the broader Japanese power grid. About 6% of Japan's total LNG supply flows through the Strait of Hormuz, relying heavily on massive coastal storage facilities like these. Faced with a sudden LNG bottleneck, the government made an emergency policy pivot. They relaxed the strict operating limits on coal plants for a full year, specifically to conserve their rapidly depleting natural gas reserves. Since late 2023, LNG has been significantly more expensive to burn than coal. With the crisis choking off LNG imports entirely, J-POWER's coal fleet shifts from a standard baseload provider to the most vital and profitable asset on the grid. What is normally categorized as a high-emissions liability has transformed into an irreplaceable national asset. But wait, if global shipping is paralyzed, shouldn't their coal supply lines be cut off too? J-POWER sources its coal from Australia, Indonesia, and North America. These shipping routes stretch across the Pacific Ocean, completely avoiding the conflict zones in the Middle East. Direct ownership of Australian coal mine rights provides a physical safety net, bypassing the price volatility of the international spot market. Looking at this chart, you can see their one structural weakness, the time lag. When global coal prices inevitably rise in sympathy with oil, it takes time for utility companies to adjust their rates. J-POWER has a legal mechanism to pass those increased fuel costs onto consumers, but the delay between buying expensive coal and collecting higher electricity bills creates a temporary dent in their balance sheet. They aren't completely immune to a global commodity panic. They just have a much deeper buffer than their LNG-dependent competitors. Zoom out from the immediate 2026 panic, and the lasting impact of this crisis becomes clear. The Hormuz crisis transformed domestic energy production into a critical national security priority. Extensive renewable networks like these are now vital strategic assets. This geopolitical shift accelerates the timeline for assets like J-POWER's Oma nuclear power plant, elevating it to a top priority infrastructure project designed to permanently sever reliance on foreign oil. Of course, if the conflict drags on long enough to trigger a severe global recession, plunging electricity demand will eventually hurt J-POWER too. But until that extreme threshold is crossed, their position remains remarkably stable. They survive a national supply shock by building a grid spread across wind, water, and geographically isolated coal, proving that real energy security comes from structural and geographic diversification.